Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the fourth meeting of the Language and Identity Workshop series. My name is Naoko Hosokawa, postdoctoral fellow at Tokyo College, and I'll be moderating the event today. This is the lecture portion of the event, which would be immediately followed by the workshop portion with 4 presentations on the topic of language in public space, identity, and urban environment. Please note that the workshop portion of the event has a separate Zoom link. Before starting this lecture, let me remind you that there is the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. If you'd like to listen to this lecture in Japanese, please feel free to select the Japanese button for the live English to Japanese interpretation. この講演を日本語でお聞きになりたい方は、画面下の言語ボタンで日本語を選択してください。And if you have any question you'd like to ask, you can use the Q&A function to send us your questions at any time of the lecture. So today, for the keynote lecture, we have Professor Peter Backhaus. Peter is professor at Waseda University in Tokyo, and his research interests are sociolinguistics, pragmatics, and writing and orthography. His publications include Linguistic Landscapes, a comparative study of urban multilingualism in Tokyo, and Care Communication, Making a Home in a Japanese Elder Care Facility. He is also a regular contributor to the Japan Times bilingual column. Today, Professor Backhaus will give us a lecture entitled Foreign Elements, Identity and Hybridity in Japanese Writing Practices. Now the floor is yours. Peter, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for this nice introduction, Naoko. Then let me start right away with this presentation here. My presentation basically falls into 3 parts. At first, we will look at what I call the foreign within Japanese. And then in the second part, we will look at Japanese within the foreign. So take a kind of the counter perspective to this. And I will give you some more information about what this is on the way. So the first part is, as I said, the foreign within Japanese. And this is basically about the integration of loanwords. A couple of weeks ago on this channel, I had the great opportunity to listen to Naoko's presentation, actually, who has just published this book here on loanwords in Japanese. She actually chooses a quite similar terminology. She calls it the outside within. So this first part will be about loanwords, but not so much about the attitudes by the Japanese population. This is what we heard about last time, more about the technical things when integrating loanwords, a larger amount of loanwords into the language. And of course, I'm not the first one to do this. So basically, particularly in this first part, I will just refer to the literature on this. One extremely grateful book, great book is Mark Irwin's 2011 Loanwords in Japanese, where he looks at the integration of loanwords from all different perspectives. To start with the phonemic aspects, 2 very common processes in order to make these words fit into the Japanese system are a substitution, where the particularly consonants that are not available have to be substituted by something else, and this gives you from scenario to scenario, tip to chip, dilemma to dilemma, theater to theater. So and a lot of other things. So this is just really a handful of many other substitutions that need to be made. And then the second, a second process is epenthesis. That means vowel insertion. This is also very, very common, as you know. This is really part of this, what many people perceive as this katakana pronunciation that you have from ham, and then you hamu, and bas becomes basu. So you get all these silent vowels inserted there. And these are the two main processes that you need to know with respect to the phonemics. Now, another thing that is very important is how do you integrate it graphically, orthographically. And here we can see that if you look at this chart here from another very interesting book, already a little bit older, from 2004, from James Stanler, where he gives us a list of so-called new katakana combinations, maybe not so new anymore now, 20 years later, but they had to be really invented at some point in order to make some of the non-available sounds available. If you look at just the examples that I quoted in the previous slide, so actually there is now a way to write C. There is now a way to write T as in tip, even though you still write and call it chip, but you could in principle also make it tip. And you could in principle also now write dilemma with a D. That is now there, and that wasn't there earlier. Speaking of the writing, one thing that is probably almost too obvious to say it, but still I just wanted to clarify this, that the default language for writing loanwords is, of course, katakana. And this is not only just simple common sense, but it is actually specified. Yeah, I found two documents here where this is explicitly specified in the 1952 publication by Bunkacho, I think, and then also a little more up to date in 2005. It was reconfirmed by the NHK Kotoba no Handobook that they will, in principle, they will write foreign loanwords in katakana. The reason why I'm telling this to you here in the first place is that actually there are a few other options to write for writing loanwords, and one which is unfortunately quite limited, but it is still there, is of course to write loanwords, particularly older loanwords. There is still some concomitant or some coexisting kanji writing available for these words. And here are a few examples, of common terms and also common abbreviations. One of the most puzzling, I always, particularly when I started learning Japanese, I always wondered about this third one here for America. Of course, this is just an ateji here, but I always found it quite confusing that why of all countries, the US, who is really not known as a rice eating country in comparison to Asia, why they should be abbreviated with this bei, with this rice kanji. But yeah, that's how things develop. And another option we should not forget is that it is also possible, and it is also practiced in real, to take foreign loanwords and just write them in hiragana. And I've enlisted here a few examples of these, well, old traditional, relatively well integrated loanwords, where you get the feeling that at some point when it has been around long enough, people say, okay, then we can also write it in hiragana, like tabako or tomato. It's not that rare a sight. But you can also manipulate it and just take more recent loanwords and just try to make them a little bit, oversimplifying, I could say, to make them look a little bit more cute, like you have these words here. Just these three examples here. And actually, there has been a very interesting research on this by a colleague of mine, Hannah Kunert, who wrote her PhD on this very topic, and who found out quite a number of interesting things, not least that the practice is actually much more common than most people think it is. And after reading this dissertation, I noticed that actually I was also doing this years ago already, and recently I remembered it. The only order-made suit I ever made for myself, inside got this for some reason, and that was really more than 20 years ago, but for some reason I told the suit maker, please write my name in Hiragana. So I was also, without knowing it, kind of manipulating the system. Okay, so loanwords, you can also write them in Hiragana. And of course, and this is maybe, may look kind of boring, but I promise you it is not. Another very, very common practice is just to not change them at all. That means in Japanese, use loanwords by writing them in Roman alphabet, and also keeping the orthography like it is in English. And you have that, maybe that was kind of the beginning, that you have these abbreviations like USA, centimeter, and so on, etc. itself, of course, also. So you could have these abbreviations, you would find them in Japanese texts. But then, and particularly in public space now, on posters and things, you will also find longer phrases or whole words that are written in the Roman alphabet in a Japanese environment, like bargain, summer sale, and so on. Here are two examples of photos I took somewhere. So if you have KQ de Haneda e, the point is, of course, and I think this is a good test. I don't have any larger participant experiments here, but I'm very sure that when you ask someone to read this poster here, they will read it KQ de Haneda e speedo up. So that means you have the English, you have the Romaji, and you have the English spelling. But still, most people will not read it KQ de Haneda e speed up, right? And there you can see that it's actually intended probably not to be English, but it is to be like a loan word or two loan words. Another thing here on the second sign where you have the floor guide, here I think what's interesting is that actually you do not have a Japanese byline. So you don't have go anai, or you don't have any katakana floor guide in the title line. You only have a Chinese title line. So what you can see here is that it is clearly intended also to be read and pronounced by a Japanese audience. Now, this is not clearly not targeting mainly foreign audience, as you can also see from the details on the sign, where there is almost no English there. You know, the small things are all in Japanese only. So here too, my guess would be that most people read this headline as floor guide and not floor guide or something. Another development in this respect that needs to be taken into consideration is that we have had a very strong surge of actually exchanging katakana and then go for the original English spelling in Romaji. This is just one example for convenience, a photo I took a couple of years ago, and I think it it shows very nicely the process where you started out in the 1970s with still basically very katakana heavy kind of coffee can. And then if you look at 2004, 2006, I don't have anything about the situation after 2006, but here you can see that you still have ko, he at the bottom in katakana, but everything else is now Romanized. So you have this, even if there's not so much change of the contents, you still have this very quick or very impressive development, actually, from exchanging katakana and writing loan words in Roman alphabet. Okay, so that was just a quick ride through the basics about the foreign within Japanese. And then in a second step, I would now like to look at the things from the complementary perspective of Japanese within the foreign. That means this is about what to do with originally Japanese words when you Romanize them. And well, the first thing to look maybe if you want to learn about Romanization is how children in Japan learn it. This is from a recent textbook for elementary school. And yeah, I guess most people here also are familiar with these kind of textbooks from their own school days. Here is the explanation about Romaji. This is not in English class, this is kokugo, right? So this is really about how you spell Japanese terms when you want to Romanize them. And the main point here is that it is still common practice in the Japanese school system to recommend and start by teaching the Kunrei system, which is a little bit different from the Hepburn system, as I'm saying most people are aware of here. Actually, there are quite a number of different spellings. I have here marked them here in red, where you have, well, you get the corresponding Hepburn reading in brackets, but they recommend the Kunrei reading. And you can also see it from this example, from these two examples down here, where they say chawan with a TYA instead of a CHA, which would be Hepburn, or densha SYA, which in Hepburn would be SHA. So this is what children at school learn first. But on the other hand, in the same textbook that I found that quite interesting, you have a few pictures about, well, Romaji in our daily lives. And if you take a close up look at these pictures, you can see that actually all of them do not use Kunrei, but they are in Hepburn. So Kajibashi Dori here below, that would be the corresponding Kunrei spelling. Shin Osaka also, it wouldn't be SA, it would be an S. And the same for Higashi Yodogawa, where you would have, sorry, this is my spelling mistake. Yodogawa, not Yodagawa. Yeah, but where you're focusing on the Higashi, where you have an S instead of an SH. So even in this textbook, they're already acknowledging that maybe the reality is a little bit different, and that is true because most public signs in Japan actually use the Hepburn system and not the Kunrei system. And what I found really interesting, only last year, the Bunkacho published their annual Kokoro ni kansuru yoronchosa study on the Japanese language. And they inserted a question here, I think actually for the first time, asking about these Kunrei and Hebonshiki practices and asking people how they would spell certain terms. They had 3 examples here: Akashi, Uji, and Aichi. And I didn't tell people, well, this is Kunrei and this is Hepburn, anything. They just asked, how would you spell them? And as you can see in all three cases, the large majority of people actually, although they were supposed to have learned it differently at school, they went for the Hepburn, for the Hepburn spelling rather than the Kunrei spelling. This is the Kunrei spelling here on the left, and that was only chosen by a minority of people. I'm telling you this in some detail here because one major difference, because the two systems is actually that the Hepburn system is closer to English spelling than the Kunrei system, which tries to map these former Japanese phonemic rules. But the Hepburn system is really closer to English spelling. And I think this really has an impact on Japanese people's feelings for Romanizing their language. We come back to that later on. Before that, one other important thing that we need to clarify here. Coming back a little bit to the first part of the presentation. Again, this is pointing out the obvious, but when you Romanize loanwords, then, as I said before, you will normally use original English orthography. And this is so intuitive that probably nobody will ever think it could be different, but it could be different. If you take this example here, where you have the Japanese original here, Yomiuri Rando, and then you have what I suspect is an English translation of it. And then you can see that this is original English spelling, L-A-N-D, and not this, which would be an option, because Rando is R-A-N-D-O, Rando. But this is not how it is. And most people in this room probably will agree that it is good that it is not that way, that this L-A-N-D looks far better. And that is really that's why I said it's the default choice to go back to English orthography. And you only very rarely will find exceptions from this rule. I have one for you here on this signboard here in Nerima ward, where on this first sign you have something that is, I think, quite rare. That is so rare that really made me want to take a photo here, where you have something like a loanword, sun life, and then what you get in the Romanized line is not like S-U-N-L-I-F-E, F-E, but what you get is really a very, very literal, close transliteration of the katakana. But as I said, this is really rare case, and you will really have difficulties, I think, spotting similar cases in the city. Okay. Now I come to the final point, which is what I think is a relatively recent trend, which is the idea to use English orthography rules not only when you have a loan word and want to put that back into English, but also when you have a non-loan word, and when you have a very domestic Japanese word, and still you can now see moments where even in those cases, people try to give it some English touch by changing the orthography and making it more English looking. In an article I wrote 2 years ago, I referred to this as eigoshiki, for lack of a better term. And what this is for example, I just try to point out a few rules that you can now see quite frequently. One rule is that you do not use K, but you use a C. And then, of course, you get a kind of a different feel to it. Two examples here from Don Quixote. The card that they're having here, electronic cash card, and they call this, which I find quite funny, magica. And of course, if you were to spell this according to the rules of Hepburn system, then you would not get a C, but there is no C. It would always be a K. Or then kokochi, there's also a lot of kokoro. If you look around the city, there's a very strong trend actually to write it with these two Ks with a C here. So that is, I think, one kind of rule that is about to get stuck a little bit, that you change K to C. Another rule, well, let's call it a trend, not a rule. But what you can also see every now and then is that you go away from this la li lu le lo, this line, which, as you know, normally in Lomaji that you would use an R for all of these, and change it into an L. Two examples here from my local little department store around my station that I normally use. You have fureru, meaning touch something, and you get these two R's here replaced by an L each. Or quite recently, I saw it only a couple of days ago in the subway. This new poster here, which I guess this is supposed to mean aruku. And here too, you would spell it with an R normally when you Romanize according to the common rules, and that has been exchanged by an L. Another trend also from the domain of consonants is to do away with the B in writing and make it a V. Two examples here. So at the flower shop where they offer you a summer, well, haba. Haba is, of course, a Japanese word. It is not an English word. And also the pronunciation will never likely become tava. It will always be taba. But for some reason, it seems to look better when you exchange the B by a V. And the same holds for musubi. No matter how hard you try, this probably doesn't make sense with a pure V pronunciation. It's supposed to be a Japanese word, but still the optics, that I think was kind of the idea of this sign writer, the optics is just better if you have that V there instead of the B. These were what I think the three most common examples from the realm of consonants, but we also have a lot of things happening with vowels. And here too, there is some trend to use some more English-like vowel readings when writing Japanese words. For example, here with E, Fuji or Fuji-i, I don't know what this is, could be both. But in any case, normally you would, of course, write it with an I, like A, I, U, E, O. The A, I, E is written as an I in English for specific reasons. And one of my favorites is this one here, Bendi. This is a local bendiasan in my area. And here too, here the final I becomes replaced by Y, and then it gets this kind of adjectivical feel to it, which I think is really nice, really well done. So E, the vowel E, long O is also interesting. Now there are a lot of different ways of spelling it. I've given you only two examples here. A local company also close to where I live, Maruko. This is just supposed to be a long O, and then they write it in this English idea that you lengthen the O with a W. Or even more complex, this kochi, gakuen, and this coach is then written as English coach. And again, very nice, because I think most people would also then read the Roman line as kochi and not coach. So you really get you can see how the two things are interrelated, how you use English orthography and pronounce it in a katakana way, and how this is then reflected in the way the orthography was chosen. So long O, and then final example. This is quite complicated, I think, and also maybe not as intuitive as the others. This is from a mall, also in my neighborhood, and this is not supposed, because we have also already talked about Kunrei system. This is not ichi. This is not supposed to mean ichi. This is, as you can easily see if you look at the bylines, this is supposed to mean I tie. The idea here being that, well, the letter in English is an I, and so we use it in this reading as I tie, even though even in English, probably nobody would ever get the idea of reading this I tie, because the rules are a little bit different here. But again, you can see the idea is that we choose the sound value of the English letter and then integrate it into our spelling of Japanese words. Speaking of vowels, in the beginning I said there is this appendices thing when you integrate foreign loan words. When you write Japanese words in Roman alphabet, you can observe something like the opposite. I call it de-epenthesis here. That means actually the vowels that you would normally write when you Romanize will not be written. So in this example here, for example, this karaoke place here, which is called kosumosu, and then you have the first silent U is still in there for some reason. You know, this is very faithful transliteration, but the second U for some reason got lost. It's not kosumosu, it's just kosmos, so it's supposed to end on an S. And then I've already shown you this aruku example where of note is not only that the R has become an L, but also that the U that would follow on the L or the R, aruku, is also gone here. So they really unmake the vowel insertion here. Finally, what is likely the most complicated thing here, even I, as really someone who really appreciates this, find this a little bit over the top, though also very funny, is this smile here, this yakitoriya, which you might be tempted to read smile, but if you look down here, you can see that actually this is not supposed to be read smile at all. This is sumire. And of course, it is a word play. It also has some smile in there, but this is actually supposed to be that. And that means, again, here you have the de-epenthesis when you would normally write S-U, and the U is omitted here. And then that gives you something that is, in fact, very hybrid in terms of both language and script. I was calling this I have been calling this a recent trend, as you may have noticed. Maybe it is actually not as recent as I think. One of the examples I wanted to present here is from something that is very old, where you have this famous game here, arcade game. And most people probably haven't ever thought about this, but here actually you can already observe something like eigoshiki, because this thing, the main character here was of course derived from the idea of paku paku taberu, and paku paku of course is also not a loan word or anything, it's pure Japanese. And then of course you could have spelled it this way, but fortunately, I should say, they didn't get the idea, but they are already doing the things here. They are already removing the U, they are already exchanging the K by a C, and then you get how it is now world famous. So it is already, it has already been there in 70s, 80s to some extent. One final thing I wanted to show you here is a more recent example again, Back to the Future, as it were. This is, I think, from 1 year ago or so, a commercial about this this new type of chips here. And unfortunately, the sound share doesn't work for some reason. So I will show it to you at only 15 seconds, and you can maybe just watch it without the sound. The idea here is that they are playing on the word thin. Here, this is of course IPA for a TH. So this is supposed to be something like thin, but the katakana line doesn't even try to imitate the TH, but it's just su and E. And the additional joke in there is that it is also playing on the idea of shin hatsubai, which they also and this actress here actually pronounce it, and at the end she says, you will not be able to hear it, but she says thin hatsubai, something like this. So yeah, I'm going to play it to you anyway. So I guess you couldn't hear that, but we have this Shin Hatsubai, Shin Kando or whatever, and she was already putting the TH there and playing on this also. Another very, I think, interesting case related to the idea of eigoshiki. So let me come to my conclusions then. We have looked at two aspects. The first one was the foreign within Japanese. So we started by looking at loanwords and how they are commonly integrated into the language. In terms of writing, we have seen that the default choice is katakana, but we also have this trend now to spell it, to use the alphabet. And when we use the alphabet, we will always respell it in the original English orthography. The example I gave you was the Yomiuri Rando, and then you spell it L-A-N-D and not R-A-N-D-O or something. With respect to Japanese within the foreign, so how do you Romanize Japanese? I have shown you that we have this traditional Kunrei rules, but they coexist and are increasingly, I think, losing to the Hepburn spelling, which, to repeat this, is closer to English spelling rules. And then a third step I have spent quite some time on to discuss here, because this is something I think is quite new, is this eigoshiki, a thing where you write Japanese words in Roman alphabet and try to integrate some elements of English spelling rules there. And the result is related to the general topic of this workshop here, is of course a very high degree of hybridity. And what you get is, particularly with these eigoshiki things, is that you have what looks very much English, because it has this English orthography, follows English orthography rules, but still in most cases, it retains this katakana reading. KQ, kyuko made, speedo up, and no speed up or something. That means you have an increasing visibility of the English and the alphabet, but you have also I think, on the other hand, an increasing domestication in terms of pronunciation, which is not really moving, which still has this katakana feel most of the time. So you see something, you find something that is visually looks very much like English, but at its core is, I think, very much Japanese. I've tried to, just for this final slide, to put it all together somehow, in a little graph here, where we have these two poles. Yeah, we could call them maybe we call that planet Japanese and planet English. Crudely simplifying, I admit that, but let's conceive of these two planets here. Both planets kind of have a certain gravity, a zone of gravity. And if we try to locate some of the terms that I was talking about here, then we could, for example, start with something like clear case. So you have goannai, and then this is, of course, part of planet Japanese. And then you have information. In this pronunciation, information. So this is 100% English. But then you also have some things in the middle. So you can also write goannai, use the Loanword and make it information in katakana. And of course, then you can also write it in Roman alphabet. But that was the point I wanted to make in the last slide. Probably, if you use that in Japan, most people will read it not information, but they will read it information nonetheless. So it doesn't matter if it is Romanized, and it doesn't matter if it follows English spelling rules. So this is the reading I assume most people will give this term here. And similar things like yomiuri rando, and then we have this English term land, and then we have something in the middle, which again, most people in Japan will probably spell L-A-N-D, but they'll read it rando. Another example I wanted to make here, because now we also get a little bit of the hiragana in here. So if you have something that started out as a loan word, you can of course also move it even closer into the Japanese sphere by starting to write it in hiragana. On the other hand, you have the original term tomato, and then again in the middle you have something that looks like tomato, but that most likely most people will read tomato nonetheless. The interesting thing here is, of course, with tomato, it's a fascinating thing, because also the actual reading as a Romanized term tomato is exactly the same as the English spelling. Then you have things like, well, I quickly talked about this, the Romanization and the differences between Hepburn and Kunrei. In that respect, I told you that Kunrei is closer to the core, but actually what is far more common is Hepburn shiki. But Hepburn shiki is moving closer to the English sphere, actually. Yeah, and then you have things like we could call dead ends, where you don't actually have an English corresponding term here. It's just bendy, and then it is not derived from any English term, but it looks very English now thanks to the Y at the end. Same with magica. Again, there is no English term, no English original for that, or aitai for that matter, or the last thing I showed you, unfortunately, without the sound, even more complex, where you have something like Shin Hatsubai, and then you play around with it and spell it like thin, and then when you try to figure out what the original is, you actually don't know, because it plays with the idea both of thin and of new in the case of ala Shin Hatsubai. And the Sumire example, of course, would also belong here in this letter category. Okay, yeah, so that was kind of a desperate attempt, if you will, to get it all somehow on a map, these things I've been talking about today. And that is it for my part. And I now give the floor back to Naoko. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this wonderful presentation. There are so many interesting things happening related to writing and creative and visual expressions in the Japanese language, and we have learned so much of it. And now we have a question here now on the chat. So this is a question from Nathan Hobson. Thank you. Thanks for all of these clear and thorough examples and for the lovely neologism eigoshiki. And a question and a comment. Comment first. Katakana and now Romaji are the language of commerce. One does not sell an aoi t-shirt. Instead, it is blue or blue. This is implicated in a question of social and economic capital, and therefore must be a process of creative linguistic destruction and reconstruction. One of my favorite examples of complex hybrid orthography as a status marker is soft France sound, which is clearly not meant for non-Japanese consumers, but rather to playfully wink wink, nudge nudge, giving the no-Japanese consumers a sense of their own cosmopolitan sensibility. So now the question, can you talk about the continuities and discontinuities between the examples you gave of ludic orthography with modern and contemporary loanwords and the practices of layered orthography from as far back as Heian and as recent as J-pop, for example, Aen with the reading Ishun, for example.
What was the last one? Aen with the reading
Aen with the reading of Ishun.
Okay, so the opposite, you mean, of what it actually means.
Yes.
So ludic and layered orthography as these two ideas. The one pretty new, the first one, but layered actually pretty old. Is that how I understand it, the question?
Yes, you can also read the question from the Q&A session. Yes, so.
Oh, Q&A session. Yeah, now I saw it. Sorry, I was only trying to make sense of it already. Oh yeah, there it is. Sorry, I didn't see it. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is just giving this historical background. I think that Japanese is actually a language that makes it also easy to do all these different plays, because you have this background, you have this script import from the beginning. You started out with a system that was clearly not ideal, trying to write Japanese in Chinese kanji characters. That was quite bold, actually, and then you also had to use a lot of makeshifts, develop your own syllabaries, or even two of them, for example, the idea that you have, as you mentioned, this double writing, that you write a term and then you can write something else on top. Please read like this, for example, is of course common practice, and historically also, and that may also help making all this ludicity possible nowadays. That people seem to be quite at ease, for example, with something having more than one reading. Whereas in languages where you normally have just one spelling system, and then something that ideally is very close to how you pronounce it actually. So what you call a shallow phonemic system, then there may be much fewer things that you can actually do with that. So I think the idea that there is some history behind it is in fact very, very helpful. Thank you very much for this one.
Thank you very much for your answer. And if I may, I'd like to also ask a question. You explained how the writing of Loanwords has become more and more in Roman alphabet. And also you have shown all these examples use of Eigo-shiki writing for the Loanwords and also the Japanese words. I was wondering if there will be other trend, maybe using the Japanese writing system as well. I was away from Japan for quite some time and I came back and I was quite struck by some of the company names or brand logos retrieving Japanese writing. So place like the bookstore Tsutaya, I remember as being written in alphabet, and nowadays in Tokyo, in a very trendy places, their bookstores are sometimes written in kanji writing of Tsutaya Shoten, writing in 4 characters. And also I realized that the clothing company Uniqlo started to use katakana for their logo as they internationalize their business. So I thought maybe to target some of the international consumers, they also use the Japanese writing as part of their creative image making. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I certainly have thoughts, and I certainly have no objections to that. I think this is a very interesting trend from the other side of the pond, if you will. Where, of course, since I think the 1980s, you have seen this this boom in Japanese pop culture, and where actually in many places in the world, Japanese is now considered to be something very cool. And I think the situation was totally different until the 1980s. And that's why until then, the import was only, or the import-export balance was really bad. It was only imported. And nowadays, many people, even though they may not be able to make any sense of the katakana reading, they will appreciate that. And find it cool that they have Unikuro now with the katakana logo. And I think the idea is pretty similar to these early katakana days, where people was also always saying and always complaining, well, these Japanese, they just import everything. They don't even know what it means just because it looks good. And probably there was a lot of truth behind that as well. But now you have exactly the same thing also in many places abroad. And you could also launch the same criticism here. They don't even know what it means, but still they think it's cool and they want to have it. And I wouldn't bet on having some Nihonshiki for English in English anytime soon. But yeah, we'll follow up on that.
Yes, thank you very much. So now I'm afraid that we are out of time, but for those of you who are planning to join the workshop portion, we just put the Zoom link for the second part of this event on the chat. So please click on that link to participate in the second part as well. And for those of you who participated for this event, thank you very much. And please follow the latest information of the Tokyo College on our website and social media. And for those of you who are planning to come to the second part, see you in a few minutes. Actually, it starts from 4 o'clock. So please connect to the link given in the chat box. Thank you very much once again, Professor Peter Backhouse, for this wonderful talk about this Japanese writing and orthographic system. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. So
Bye.
See you soon.
See you soon, and bye for now.
Bye for now.
you.